I'm Jacob Courtwright, and this is The Locker Room. Hello, Locker Room listeners. Welcome into the show. If you're new, thank you for joining us today. If you're a returning guest, thank you for returning back to the Locker Room podcast. I don't take it for granted. I understand you could be listening to anyone and anything else at any point during this day, so the fact that you have stopped on the Locker Room means the world to me. Now, before we can get started, I've got to ask for a favor, and I know some of you are just tired of listening to this, but the more followers and comments I can get on social media, the more this can get out there. All right? So follow the Locker Room on our social media. If you like us, give us a thumbs up on one of our posts or whatever it may be. The Locker Room Podcast 615 on Instagram, The Locker Room Host Jacob on Facebook, TLR with Jacob on Twitter, and The Locker Room 22 on TikTok. This episode is brought to you by FNX Fitness. If you are not looking to be happier, healthier, and a better version of you, then listen, this sponsor doesn't matter to you. But if you are, like all of us out there, if some of us are tired of having the dad bods, if some of us are tired of going to the beach and feeling ashamed of the gut hanging over their swimsuit, and I'm more so speaking for myself because that was me, stop it today and use FNX Fitness as your source for all of your gym needs. Whether it's clothing, whether it's training equipment, whether it's recoveries, whether it's supplements, whatever it is, they've got it all. Vitamins, you name it. FNX is your one-stop shop for all your fitness and health needs. Be a better version of you today. Use your promo code TLRHOST. That's TLRHOST for 15% off your order. Listen, over the weekend, we were privy to one of the worst fight nights, one of the worst fighting cards, one of the worst fighting events ever put on in history. I don't care how many it sold, but that was the biggest waste of $49.99 in my entire life. I can't stress this enough, how bad this entire evening was. We're going to start from the beginning. We're going to go to the end. All right? I'm going through this entire event. First and foremost, the fight lasted like 15 seconds? So if you're looking at just the pure fight, it was terrible. Now, if you're a Jake Paul fan, which there's not many of you out there, and or there's not enough of you out there that are proud enough to say it, I'm sure it was great for you. Listen, I'm not going to get into the conspiracy theories today, but I have followed Ben Askren for a very long time. And I found it very interesting that he couldn't take that punch in 8-ounce plus gloves from Jake Paul. He took literal death hammers from Robbie Lawler. And when I mean death hammers, I thought Robbie Lawler was murdering him and we were going to have a trial that next month. That's how bad the punches were to Ben Askren's face. And he still survived that and somehow knocked out Robbie Lawler. So Ben Askren has a chin. If there's anything I could say about Ben Askren is that he has a very good chin. He's one of the world's best wrestlers, and he's had a very illustrious career. But like his chin and his wrestling are what he was known for. He could take damage and then get you to the ground and then do damage to you on the ground because he was so good at wrestling and had such a strong chin. So if you look at the punch analytically, if you look at it up close, doesn't look like that hard of a punch. It's a solid punch, but not a bad enough punch to where I assumed Ben Askren was going to be out of that fight. And he went up to the referee, and usually how boxing works, for those of you who aren't like massive boxing fans, maybe you just watch this because, oh, hell, it's Jake Paul fighting, and, he's fighting some schlub, and you wanted to see the big Jake Paul talk about. That in boxing, unless there's physical signs of a concussion, usually if a fighter says, I'm good to go, they let him go and let them die on their shield. More so in boxing, I think, than the UFC, than any type of MMA. Why? Because the MMA, of course you have gloves that are not 8 and 10 ounce gloves. You have kicks, you have knees, you have elbows. I mean, you can utilize more weapons in MMA that can inflict more damage than a punch from a boxing glove. So in boxing, they really let these guys go on. So if we want to get real technical and annoying here, I have seen guys get rocked 1,000 times harder than Ben Askren and knocked down 1,000 times harder. And if that fighter stands up and says, no, I'm good, they let that fight continue. So it was an abrupt ending of the fight. I would like to have seen Ben Askren continue the fight. Like I said, I'm not going to get into the conspiracy theories that this whole fight was rigged and that he was paid to lose, even though there might be some merit to it. It's intriguing to go down that road, but I'm not going to go down that road because then I know what's going to happen. My social media is going to flood with all of you like, you're just mad that Jake Paul won. Listen, I am mad that Jake Paul won. I hate Jake Paul, and we'll talk about all of that in just a second. You wanted Ben Askren to win? Absolutely, I wanted Ben Askren to win. I like Ben Askren. I think he's hilarious, and he's one of the more underrated MMA fighters of all time. 19-2 record. Only been knocked out once in his career. Like, when we're talking MMA, take boxing aside, we're talking about straight MMA. Got rocked by Jorge Masvidal, right? So, like, I'm a big fan of Ben Askren. I think he's very underrated, how funny he is. He's a great fight promoter. You know, he can play the bad guy role. He can play the good guy role. He can play any kind of role, and he just does a great job at it. But it seems to me to be very interesting that Ben Askren had 11 weeks, and he still didn't look that heavy in shape. Now, he's never been a six-pack, giant arms kind of guy, but, you know, all we heard was, oh, he's in shape. He didn't look that great. He looked super slow. He looked super skeptical, which is not what Ben Askren does. And if you look at when Jake threw the punch, right, Ben Askren was doing a lot of ducking and leaving his hands down real low. Now, I don't care if you are not a boxer. That is not your first move when you're in a real fight. It's just not. So, there were some peculiar things. Like I said, I'm not going to get into the conspiracy theory here, that it was rigged, even though it might have been, even though it doesn't really make any sense. But, yeah. That's just I don't want to get into it. I don't want to get into it because I don't want to get the kickback that I know I will get. Listen, Jake won the fight. Congratulations to Jake. You're now, 3-0 with 3 TKOs? Like, congratulations. And we'll talk about where Jake should go here in just a minute. But let's rewind this back to the very beginning of the night. So, it starts at 9 o'clock at night. Already, you know, the UFC has already been kicked off. The UFC usually starts at 9 o'clock at night, but that's usually like the main card. And the main card's done at usually, depending how the fights go, like 10:45, 11 o'clock. And you're like, not a problem. So I waited all night for this damn fight. The fight comes on at, 11:50 Eastern, something like that? Not even. I think it might have even been past midnight. Whatever it was, I wasn't in bed until like 1:15, 1:20. By the time all this got said and done, I picked up the kitchen like my wife told me to and made sure the couch was all neat and tidy so she'd wake up and not freak out on me, right? She likes things in order. And I'm a kind of leave it where it lies guy until you feel like picking it up. Listen, I'm not saying that I'm a slob. I keep a very clean household and a very clean room. I'm very tidy myself. But when it comes to like folding blankets, making a bed, you know, like stuff like that, like I'm good. It's fine. I'll sleep in that bed again that night. It doesn't need to be made. I'll use that blanket again, right? I'm sure my wife's going to listen to this and be like, oh, so that's how you think, huh? I might have just dug myself a hole there. But I'll use the ladder and climb back out here. So the fight, way too late. So I start the fight and I go, okay. You know, it's got like a couple musical performances. You have the commentators just kind of going back and forth. And then we get into the first card. All right. Terrible fight. It was boring. Not a lot of action. That's one of my main problems with boxing. Besides some of the bigger name draws in boxing, the Floyd Mayweathers, the Tyson Furies, the Jacobs, the people like that. Besides those guys, there's not a whole lot of fights that I'm tuning in to watch when it comes to boxing. I can watch an MMA event all day long. I can watch bare knuckle fighting all day long. But when it comes to boxing, unless it's a main guy that I really like I think the last fight I really paid attention to was the Tyson Fury fight and Deontay Wilder, because I'm a big Tyson Fury guy. When I heard his story, it was incredible. But as far as the first fight, boring, could have cared so little. We then proceed to go into a 5.5 hour concert. I swore halfway through, I was like, oh, I accidentally am at the Grammys. Like, I clicked on the wrong thing. I bought the wrong pay-per-view. Like, I'm just at the Grammys from 2019 or whatever. And, I was just like, this is dumb. So I've exited in and out of this pay-per-view trying to figure out, man, am I doing something wrong? Is this the pre-show? When's the fight actually start? And it just went song to song to artist to dumb concert for an hour and a half before we got to two other okay fights. I'm not even going to say okay, two other fights that I could have cared so little about. And then all the way to the main event that lasted a whopping 15 seconds. Then the ref didn't even let Ben Askren go out on a shield. He let him get tapped once. He stood up and goes, no, you're done. So already I'm pissed. Listen, I'm an old man. I'm in bed by like 10 o'clock every single night. And I had to stay up till 1 in the morning to watch this fiasco. So first and foremost, Triller equals trash. Triller did a horrible job, and I think their numbers will reflect this afterwards. I know that they dare not put out some sort of poll. That was an atrocious show. I could have cared. When you tune into a fight, there is a certain crowd of people. And listen, I think more fighters tuned into this because it was Jake Paul versus an MMA guy. More fight fans, I should say, than just entertaining fans. Like the Tyson fight, the Mike Tyson fight was interesting. Jake Paul and Nate Robinson. That was just more of an entertainment show. But even that card was carried a lot by Jake Paul knocked out Nate Robinson. And then, of course, we saw Mike Tyson's fight and his return and watch him just piece together a great fight. Right? So you take that, you put Jake Paul as your main card. That's fine. I'm fine with Jake Paul as a main card. I'll pay $30 to watch Jake Paul fight if it's a real fighter next time. I'll preface that later. But I tuned in to watch fights. I tuned into a fight night. Listen, if there's a musical performance that opens up the show or that maybe, precedes the big fight, you have like some big musical number or whatever, some big artists come out, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with having the funny commentators, the funny off-stage skits and stuff like that, whatever. That is what it is. But the musical numbers, get them out of here. I don't care about a 45-minute concert. I don't want to see Justin Bieber forget that he has to sing 2 songs at this stupid thing, and have to come back on stage. I don't care. I don't want to see 35-minute dance numbers when I'm trying to watch fights. So Triller did a horrible job with this fight card. Everybody loves Snoop Dogg. Great. Snoop Dogg does a great job every single time he commentates anything. He's just a funny guy. He's easy to listen to, like him. Pete Davidson showed up, and I almost punched my TV screen, and just, I couldn't handle him. Listen, I don't mind Pete Davidson. I mean, I'm kind of indifferent towards Pete Davidson. He's okay on SNL, even though SNL has gone down the drain since Chris Farley and David Spade and Adam Sandler. All those guys are gone. Even before that, the Martins of the world, Steve Martins of the world, like, it's gone down the drain. We all can agree. But I'm indifferent with him. He annoyed the living hell out of me from start to finish. I mean, it's like you gave a 6-year-old a microphone and just said, run around and be as obnoxious as possible this entire fight night. Like him just going up to all these different announcers and commentators are sitting at the table and he's just being like a 3-year-old, interrupting them. He's running around doing circles. He's just being a moron. His commentating was stupid. He's talking about, how he's going to do some perverted things when the fights started and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, dude, get this out of here. I don't need 9-year-old humor. I don't need Pete Davidson being an absolute jackass on TV during an already horrible fight card, an already horrible fight night up until this point. Like, get all that crap out of there. You remove or you keep Pete Davidson and just say, hey, Pete, why don't you just do the interviews leading up to the fights? Like, I thought that was entertaining when he went into Jake Paul's camp and Jake Paul couldn't have been a bigger douchebag in the entire world. And he said, I bet against you in the Nate Robinson fight. Like, that was a cool little encounter, little TV moment. Then he went and talked to Ben Askren. I was like, that's a cool little TV moment as well. Like, I get that. That was cool. Give Pete Davidson that role. Say, hey, you do XYZ, then you're off camera. Let Snoop Dogg do what he does and just entertain the crowd and talk boxing. I'm good with all that. Triller's got to put some sort of leash on it because Jake Paul and Triller basically ran this entire evening, and it was atrocious. Stupid, boring, could have cared less. And I am a massive fight fan, so I think the fact that they're not even respecting the sport of boxing just pisses me off the most. I'm not a big boxing fan, but I respect the sport. And at this point, they're just making it a giant joke, which I guess is probably my fault. If Jake Paul's fighting, it is a giant joke. I shouldn't take it seriously. But the fight card was atrocious. The musical numbers from Pete Davidson, even at some points, I thought Snoop Dogg was a bit obnoxious. You know, smoking too much weed, too drunk. You needed to just calm down and you need to dress it up. Make it a little bit more professional, and I think a lot more fans and eyes would have been turned into it. Make us feel like it's serious. That's a lot of our problems is we don't believe that Jake Paul's fights are serious. We think this is all just a giant ploy to grab money. There's a reason people are just laughing at Jake Paul saying he could beat Conor McGregor and all these other guys. Because up until this point, Jake Paul has just been one giant joke. Oh, he's 3-0. Great. You beat a 36-year-old Ben Askren who had just come off of hip surgery, whose number one weakness in his entire MMA career was striking. His number one weakness. What do you do in boxing? You strike. Go fight Conor McGregor. I dare you. Conor McGregor's number one strength, striking. Guess what? He went whatever it was, 9-10 rounds with Floyd frickin' Mayweather. And he scored points. So you think someone who's never been a boxer his entire career, been an MMA guy, who took arguably the greatest boxer of all time 10 rounds, is not going to piece up some punk like Jake Paul? I mean, get out of here. But back to all the craziness before I get into why Jake Paul versus Ben Askren is one giant laughable joke. Overall, the fight card sucked. The prelim fights were boring. It's whatever it is, right? Put all the fights aside. I can deal with some bad fights. Listen, I've seen many a UFC fight nights. And for those of you who are big UFC fans, you know what I'm talking about, which is basically Bob versus Ken, and they just gave him UFC gloves, right? I've seen some very bad UFC fight nights. So I'm fine with bad fights. I'm not fine with bad entertainment throughout. And there's some of you that might like this. Like I said, the casual fan that doesn't really care about the boxing, but is there to just party, I'm sure you love this. Because it was a concert with a little bit of boxing at the end. So already off the bat, this was a horrible evening. Now let's talk about the fight that everybody cares about, Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. Going into this fight, I assumed Ben Askren was going to put up more of a fight. I assumed Ben Askren was going to grind it out until the 7th round. Like I said, no conspiracies here. I'm not going to say that he purposely lost, and somehow he went from a $500,000 payday to somewhere walking out with $1.3 million. So don't get me started on how all that money somehow circulated, and this man just walked out with $1 million plus, and he was only paid $500,000. So I find that very odd and intriguing. But like I said, no conspiracy theories aside, just straight talk to the fight. Leading into this fight, I've talked about how Ben Askren is not a great striker. We don't know about Jake Paul yet. We still don't know about Jake Paul, and that's the biggest problem with this whole event, is all of you Jake Paul lovers, you're now, well, he's 3-0, he beat a real fighter. Yes, he beat a real fighter, but look at the fighter's style. If Jake Paul beat the best kickboxer in the world in boxing, you'd be like, okay, great. If you don't know, in kickboxing nowadays, you have to land a certain amount of kicks per round, so you can't really focus on the hands, because it used to be you just boxed, and kick was just at the very end of it. But like today's kickboxers, you have to land whatever it is, 6-7 strikes in your round with legs. So if Jake Paul beat the best, WWE wrestler, the best kickboxer, would we all be going, wow, he's one of the best fighters in the entire world? No. So why are we doing that with Ben Askren? Ben Askren, who is a 2-time NCAA division champion wrestler, Big Ten 2-time division wrestler, champion. He's an Olympian. In his MMA career, you want to know how long he has stood up on his feet? I think you could probably count it on one hand. Because all Ben Askren's job in the UFC is watch and shoot for the takedown. And when he got the takedown, he would ground and pound you for 15 minutes and wear you out to the point where you just didn't want to be there anymore. His strength was never punching. His strength was never standing up and throwing fists. So we're all shocked that that guy didn't do the greatest against Jake Paul. Listen, Jake Paul's a big guy too, whatever he is. 6'1", 6'2". Ben Askren's 5'10". Jake Paul, very much in shape, 24 years old. Ben Askren, 36 years old, coming off a hip surgery. This isn't me here defending Ben Askren. Ben Askren, if you're dumb enough to believe that this hurts Ben Askren's legacy, you're not a real fight fan. You don't know what Ben Askren has accomplished in his life. So I'm not even talking to you, to be honest. That's not me trying to be mean, but I can't deal with people that are, Ben Askren's a bum, Ben Askren's this. Ben Askren is one of the better MMA fighters in history. He's a former champion. He's a 4-time champion in wrestling. He's an Olympian. Like, if you make it to the Olympics, guess what? You're no average Joe, okay? Let's put it that way. So Ben Askren, not a great striker. It completely showed. He looked out of shape. His hands were slow, but that's not what Ben does. Jake Paul, very much in shape, 24 years old. Listen, the kid looks like he works hard in the gym. He's pretty quick. He's got decent hand speed. I like his hand speed. I do not like his footwork. Any kind of real boxing fan or fighting fan would know the width of his stance will get him destroyed against a real fighter. Plain and simple. Leaves himself too exposed. If Ben Askren or Nate Robinson, or I don't even remember who the first YouTuber was that he beat was, if any of these guys were great boxers, or even good boxers, Jake Paul would probably get pieced. Plain and simple. Good hand speed, he's strong, he's got a nice frame, he's big, but at the end of the day, Jake Paul is no magical, amazing boxer. And he might be, but the problem is that we will never know until he fights a real fighter. So the fight was trash. Ben Askren was trash. He was laughing the whole way out of the ring. He was laughing in his interviews. Ben Askren just made $1.3 million to fight a YouTuber. I don't think Ben Askren really gave a crap if he won this fight, lost this fight, or even trained for it. It looked like he didn't even train for this fight. So he might not have. So Ben is one of the biggest legends when it comes to wrestling and MMA. So great. Good for Ben. Ben's a terrible boxer. Nate Robinson, great basketball player, not a good boxer. Jake Paul, decent boxer, good boxer, nice hand speed, never fought anybody real. So for those of you arguing that Jake Paul needs this, Jake Paul needs that, what he would do to this fighter, what he would do to that fighter, when Jake Paul grows a pair, fights a real fighter, and wins, I will give Jake Paul respect, and I will say Jake Paul is a real fighter. Listen, will I ever like Jake Paul as a person? No. I think he's a complete ass. He makes a complete ass of himself. He's very, very rude to a lot of people. He's been in trouble with the law several times. Pete Davidson summed it up basically that he hates Jake Paul. He's just a horrible person, and that's how the world thinks. Jake Paul is one of the most hated people in the entire world, and look up surveys. Jake Paul is like, if they take a survey of 50 people, he's disliked by 45 of those people. That's just fact. So he's not a nice person. Don't really like the guy. But if he's a good fighter, I can respect a good fighter. He's been bigger, he's had more training, and he's a better boxer than every guy that he's fought. 2 of them were never boxers. No, actually, 3 of them were never boxers. And the third one, who was a fighter, if you want to argue that he beat an MMA fighter, great. Fight somebody like Tyron Woodley. For those of you who don't know who Tyron Woodley is, man can throw some hands. That's somebody that's been circulating around this Jake Paul. Man's knocked out some serious people. So fight Tyron Woodley. Fight Dylan Dennis. Now listen, I don't think Dylan Dennis is the greatest at all, but at least Dylan Dennis is a pretty darn good boxer. Dylan Dennis is blowing up all over social media saying, hey, book this fight today. It's who he was originally going to fight before Ben Askren, but then he came off of a leg surgery and Jake Paul turned it into he was a big baby and didn't want to take the fight. And now that he's finally healthy, Dylan Dennis says, give me this fight. After the fight, Jake Paul gets in his interview, and this is the point that I'm trying to make here. In his interview, they say, do you want to face a real boxer? And he says, nah, I think I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. So this isn't about boxing. This isn't about being the best boxer. It's not about being a world champion. This is about collecting your payday, and I am okay with that. I am fine with you just collecting a massive payday, fighting a bunch of bums that don't really matter. That's fine. But stop parading yourself around like you're a real fighter. Stop parading yourself around like you're a real boxer. You're not. You're just a bum who wants to fight other bums and then claim that you're good. Okay, that's great. Guess what? I'm going to go play middle school basketball, and I'm going to put up 75 points a game. And the second the NBA goes, all right, man, let's see what you got, I'm going to be like, nah, I think I'll do whatever I want. And that's supposed to be me wanting to be the best basketball player in the world? No. That's me being a jackass. Jake Paul is a jackass. Jake Paul has not fought anybody that is a real striker. Fight somebody that's real, Jake. Fight a boxer, Jake. Fight somebody who has done this and has trained for this just as much as you have, Jake. Stop running scared and just trying to get your payday. If you're so serious about this, go find a fighter, a boxer, someone who knows how to throw hands. Fight Tyron Woodley. Fight Dylan Dennis. Fight, I dare you. Well, I know this won't happen because Conor's getting ready. We're going to talk about Conor and Dustin here in a little bit, but that fight will never happen for several years. And at that point, Conor's going to be, 40 years old by the time that fight would even probably happen. But go fight somebody that knows how to throw hands. I dare you. But you won't. You're scared. You're always going to run away. And you're always going to try and find some YouTuber or call out the next guy that he called out. His name is Fury something. I can't remember. But he's an English boxer turned reality TV star. So a guy that's got some experience, but he's also been a reality TV star for whatever, like the last 5 years or 6 years or whatever. So Tommy Fury, I think is what his name is. Go look him up. Like, this is the next guy that he says he wants to take out. Okay, so you're still not even taking this serious enough. You're never going to fight for a world title. This isn't about being a good fighter. So stop parading around and disrespecting the sport of boxing. Grow up and say, hey, listen, I'm just here to try and make my payday. I know that I'm just here. I'm an amateur boxer who has had, 5-6 years of actual real training, and I'm going against guys that have absolutely no training. Even though I think Tommy Fury would give him fits, because he's a pretty big boy if you look at him, too. I want to see Jake Paul in a real fist fight with a real boxer who has more technical skill than everybody that he's already fought. So this has nothing to do with him being the great fighter that everybody keeps saying that he is today. Jake Paul, grow a pair and fight somebody who knows how to fight. Well, did I do a good job of expressing how I felt about that, guys? I thought I did. Listen, you guys are my therapy. Everybody out there listening, you guys are like my therapy session. I can't yell all this stuff to my wife because she doesn't care. But if you're listening to this, clearly you care at least a little bit. And if someone cares a little bit, I'm going to talk to you a lot of it. I just, let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to know what you thought of the whole fight night. I'm sure some of you are going to enjoy it. If you're just a true fight fan and you want to see fights and you want to see good fights, not even good fights, just fights, and you want the night to be surrounded by the fights and not about music and all the weird entertainment and the humping and grinding going on stage for 45 minutes. Like, if you want it to be about that, I'm sure you were just as disappointed as I am. There's a wave of people over social media saying, I want my refund. This is absolutely trash. I had to wait an hour and a half in between fights for stupid musical numbers. But if you were there just to get drunk and watch musical numbers and didn't really care about the fight, I'm sure you enjoyed it. So let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what your thoughts were. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on Jake Paul, because there's a lot of you that are, hey, listen, he's a real guy now. He's a real fighter. I'm telling you, when you fight a wrestler who is a wrestler full-time his entire life, that's not any sort of giant accomplishment when it comes to the world of boxing. You want a nice fight. Good job. Nice hand speed. Good punch. I'm not going to talk about conspiracy theories, even though I don't believe that this was absolutely 100% authentic, but I'll steer away from that. Go find somebody that knows what they're doing. And then, if you win against that person, and I'm talking about same age too. Like, I want somebody that's similar age, similar size, somebody that you would actually face in real life if you were trying to make this serious. Go fight a real pro boxer, and then we'll talk. So the path to the NBA championship is pretty much narrowed down. I think we all can agree on that. The Jazz, even though they're having a great year, the Phoenix Suns, teams like that aren't going to shock the world and somehow make it to the championship this year. This is no Miami Heat of 2020 season. We're back to pretty much normal living. It looks like they're not going to be sequestered down in Florida, and have to be in a giant NBA bubble on Disney property. None of that craziness. They're starting to even bring fans back in a lot of these stadiums. Like, at the end of the day, we're going to get a pretty much normal playoff run. So it's narrowed down to the Brooklyn Nets. It's narrowed down to the Los Angeles Lakers, the Los Angeles Clippers, and then you have the Bucks and the 76ers. Like, let's just be honest. That's who this is narrowed down to. What's interesting to me is the question that has been brought up, and this is something that I wanted to talk about today, is what team desperately needs to get healthy to make things right? The Los Angeles Lakers are going to be just fine. As long as LeBron James and Anthony Davis come back 100% healthy, and Anthony Davis apparently has been activated and can play in any of the next few games immediately, as long as both of those guys come back 100% healthy, this Los Angeles Lakers team is not going to skip a beat. We see their camaraderie, we see their teamwork, we see their defense, we see the way they gel on the court without those guys. Inserting them is just another piece. It's not going to bother them. So the Los Angeles Lakers, I still fully expect to be coming out of the West, representing the West in the championship. Andre Drummond's back healthy, seems to be playing very nice, had a 27-piece the other night. The Lakers are not the team I'm worried about when it comes to health. The Brooklyn Nets, however, are the team I'm worried about when it comes to health. We have seen super teams formed all over the NBA. We've seen it happen from LeBron's, what if you want to call LeBron and the Miami Heat a super team. We have seen Golden State and Kevin Durant. We have seen these super teams form. The hardest part of any super team is winning the championship in their first year. Why? It takes a lot of time to build that team chemistry. It takes a lot of time to learn how to be coached. It takes a lot of time to learn who's going to step back and take a 40% role, not a 70% role. It takes a lot of time for that repertoire to build. The Nets mentally, I should say, need to be healthy. Physically, we know that Kevin Durant has been ticky-tacky. We know that James Harden, DeAndre Jordan, Kyrie Irving, they've all had their physical health issues. But mentally, that Nets team needs to get their crap figured out. It's already a difficult road to try and win a championship this year. Now, don't get me wrong. Everybody's going to do what they did last year, which is pick the Los Angeles Clippers to win it all. And I was one of 5 people talking in the media saying, hey, the Los Angeles Lakers are going to win the championship. The Los Angeles Clippers are going to implode on themselves, which they did. I was one of 5 people saying it publicly into a mic. You had Nick Wright and me from day one saying that this Lakers team is going to take it. But coming back to this Nets team, it's already a hard road, and we saw LeBron in Miami not win it their first year because it's a very tough thing to figure out. I don't care how much talent you put on a team. If you do not this isn't the All-Star game. You're not just going to get wide open shots and be able to put up 150 points a game. Because I had somebody bring that up. Whoa, look at the All-Star game. Look at the All-Star game. The All-Star game doesn't mean a damn thing. There's no defense being played. There's no team chemistry that has to happen. It's everybody goes one-on-one and chucks up a lot of shots. That's how that works. But the Brooklyn Nets losing games and falling further back into the seeding, the Brooklyn Nets not mentally all being healthy and ready to go is going to be a devastating nightmare for first-year head coach Steve Nash to enter into when it comes to the playoffs. Now, I'm not saying they can't make it to the championship or that they can't win it. Listen, when you have 2 of the greatest scorers in the game today, in Kevin Durant and James Harden on the same team, and the best ball handler and finisher at the rim in Kyrie Irving, you're always going to have a chance to win every single year, even if that bench was filled with a bunch of me's. That's just plain and simple. But you can't convince me that team chemistry and mental health does not play a part leading into the NBA playoffs. You can't tell me that Steve Nash isn't sweating a little bit. They think they can flip on and off the switch. This is the same thing that the Los Angeles Clippers thought last year. They could flip on a switch and they could come out here and win a championship, and we know that that's impossible to do. There's no flipping of the switch when it comes to the playoffs. You need to be playing your best basketball leading into the playoffs. Now, the Los Angeles Lakers are going to get everybody back healthy, and like I said, I'm not worried about them. They needed to go 5-7 in their last road trip. That's all they had to go in order to maintain a decent spot in the standings. They went, whatever it was, 6-7, 6-8 or whatever it is. Or 6-6, excuse me. So they already accomplished a big feat with LeBron James, and they ended up beating the Jazz with LeBron James and Anthony Davis out. They're fine. But when it comes to the Nets, they've got to get mentally prepared. Otherwise, this is going to be a nightmare of a playoff series. And listen, the Bucks are starting to come around. I like the addition of Jabari Parker for the Bucks. He'll be a nice big piece for them. And the Nets' biggest problem is facing teams with big men that can score. The Nets are going to have to run into the Bucks or the 76ers in probably the second round. And it's going to be a very hard road to the championship. I like the Bucks are starting to finally come together. I like the fact that Giannis is finally starting to pick it up. I like the addition of Jabari Parker. I like that Jrue Holiday is starting to step up. That Bucks team is going to give them fits. They've got very quick guards. The Nets are horrible on defense. And Giannis is finally starting to lead that team. You're finally starting to see him just regain some of that stuff that we have seen over the last several years. Now, the question is can Giannis do it in the playoffs? And we have seen him struggle mightily over the last few seasons when it comes playoff time. Now, let's talk about the 76ers. I do not like how the 76ers are closing games right now. They're getting massive leads, and when I say massive leads, they've had leads on the Clippers of 18, on the Nets of 25, and then they've blown it just by messing around. So that's something that Doc Rivers has to implement now before the playoffs start. Hey, you can't mess around. We can't keep messing around with this whole scenario. You can't just blow off 20-point leads and have to bring Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid back out there to close the game for you. But Joel Embiid's the MVP this year. The way he's played has been miraculous. Even with the amount of games he's missed, Joel Embiid is the best player right now in the NBA. Nikola Jokic is my second player right now. Now, if Joel Embiid keeps missing a bunch more games, I think Nikola Jokic's longevity, I should say, this season would probably bode well for him in the NBA MVP race. But the 76ers have the formula to beat the Nets. The Lakers have the formula to beat the Nets. The Lakers have the formula to beat the Clippers. See, the Nets and Clippers are not that very different, are not that far off from each other. Dynamic guards that can score the basketball. Kevin Durant's a very good defender. Kawhi Leonard's a very good defender. Paul George is a good defender. Now, the Nets as a whole are atrocious on defense. But the Clippers have pretty good defense. And with the addition of Rajon Rondo, I think that's going to bode very well for the Clippers in the future. But the Clippers, no inside scoring presence, not very good rebounders. The Nets, no inside scoring presence, no inside rebounders. Those two teams are going to run into a lot of problems with the 76ers and the Los Angeles Lakers. Teams that are big, teams that can rebound, and teams that play defense. While the Clippers are looking a lot better on defense, they still have that number one problem, which is no inside presence. So you have Zubac, which is, okay, you have Zubac and you signed DeMarcus Cousins. DeMarcus Cousins basically, at this point in his career, is a fly on the wall, doesn't really matter. But what does Zubac have to do when he's having to go out there against Anthony Davis, who can go around him at any point in time? And then when he goes out, you just throw in Andre Drummond. Who are you going to put down there? Luke Kennard? The Clippers' biggest problem is when they traded their bench away to get what they have, the Clippers doomed themselves from day one. I like how they're playing right now, but no bench is going to be a big problem, and no rebounding is going to be their biggest problem. I want to say that it is going to be a Lakers versus Nets final, and this would cement LeBron's legacy as the greatest of all time, beating another super team in the playoffs, or in the championship, But I'm not too convinced that it's going to be the Nets versus Lakers. I think it's going to be Lakers versus 76ers. The 76ers, if they can learn how to start closing ball games, have the recipe to give the Brooklyn Nets every opportunity to fail. If Joel Embiid says, I'm going to pound the rock and not just shoot 45-footers every single play, and he says, I'm going to go inside, he will eat that Nets team alive. And the 76ers play decent defense. Ben Simmons is one of the best defenders in the entire league. With the addition of Seth Curry and Danny Green, that team's going to be a nightmare for a lot of people in this season, in the playoffs. So the road to glory, right now I've got Lakers versus 76ers. I think they're the best two teams in the NBA right now. The Lakers, once they get healthy, if they're fully healthy, I fully expect them to run through the West And the 76ers, if the Nets aren't mentally healthy, and I think that's the biggest part here, if the Nets aren't mentally engaged in what they're doing, just like the Clippers last year, they're going to see an early round exit to the 76ers. Well, there it is. Last up on the list today, let's talk about Poirier versus McGregor 3. This is just early thoughts. We're going to talk a lot about this on Puncher's Chance coming up very soon. But the contract's officially signed. For those of you who follow social media, you know that there's been a ton of drama this week. We've seen Conor McGregor say, "Kiss my ass, I'm not doing the fight." We've seen Dustin Poirier say, "Fine, I'll go fight somebody else." We've seen Conor McGregor say it's off on July 10th. But the contract has been signed. And we've seen more of an edge from Conor McGregor than we have seen in a very long time. I've talked about this with fighters as a whole. Fighters that don't have their heart in the fight are fighters that are always going to lose fights. The reason Conor McGregor was so amazing coming up through the ranks of the MMA is he was fighting to put food on his table. Now, he has so much money, he doesn't need to fight to put food on the table. He doesn't need to fight to do anything. He just fights just to fight. So early discussions for this fight. Dustin Poirier looks very good. He looked very good in his last fight. Conor McGregor decided that he was just going to try and punch his way to victory, which in the MMA community is never going to work. There's one person that I can talk about right now in all of MMA that can punch his way to a victory, and that's Derek Lewis. And that's because if his one punch can land, he can literally knock out any fighter in the history of the world, I'm pretty sure. I mean, every time I bet against Derek Lewis, he's about to lose, he looks like he's getting pieced together, he just lands one giant bomb to someone's head, and then they go to sleep. Conor McGregor doesn't have Derek Lewis power. Now, Conor McGregor has disgusting power in his hands, but his hands are effective when he sets it up with kicks. But what we're seeing from Conor McGregor a lot on social media right now is Conor McGregor in normal karate stances, which is an open stance throwing a ton of kicks, then engaging with the hands. We're seeing a different type of training from Conor McGregor for this upcoming bout July 10th. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, well, there's not enough time between their last fight and July 10th to make any changes. All Conor McGregor has to do is learn how to check the leg kick, and he was landing punches left and right. He's going to land his shots. If he checks the leg kick and can start engaging with his own kicks and opening up his attack summary on Dustin Poirier, this could turn out to be Conor McGregor's big comeback fight that everybody's been talking about. I have been an advocate for Conor McGregor. He's one of my all-time favorite fighters. I've been like, this is his time. This is his time. I put money on him, and he disappoints me. If there's ever going to be a fight that engages or re-engages Conor McGregor, it's got to be Dustin Poirier 3, July 10th. This fight camp, Conor McGregor can't be the king of it. Conor McGregor can't not spar. Conor McGregor can't just decide that he's going to be lazy and go into this fight. He needs to be coachable. Conor McGregor needs to open up the playbook and say, Coach, I'm all yours. You know what we have to fix. I know what we have to fix. Now, you give me a better game plan and you work my butt off. Let me come in ready to go. I'm ready to see Conor McGregor back on top. The world's ready to see Conor McGregor back on top. What's it going to take? It's going to take Conor McGregor doing what Conor McGregor does, and that is be dynamic. We all talk about Conor McGregor's hands. He's one of the more underrated kickers and grapplers when it comes to his division. I mean, he's the only person that's ever taken a round off of Khabib Nurmagomedov. Excuse me. I'm so bad with his name. I try so hard to. He's the only person to ever take a round off Khabib. He gets lazy. He doesn't allow himself to be coached. He doesn't allow himself to be pushed to that limit where this is a limit that could break him. He's not hungry. This is the fight that could do it. I think one of the most important pieces that we're going to read about going into this fight and leading up to this fight is Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier taking a shot at Conor McGregor about giving a fund to his charity and not paying that full through. I think that could be the fuel that Conor McGregor needs to snap into it. Listen, Dustin Poirier, he's good to go. Like, he had a dominant victory. He's been dominant over the last few years. He looks great, in great shape. He's at the top of his game. So there's not much I can say about Dustin Poirier because he's doing all the right things. but his biggest mess up might have been tweeting at Conor McGregor about his donation to his charity. And if you don't know, Conor McGregor said he was going to give $500,000 to Dustin Poirier's charity. Dustin came out and said that never happened. Basically, Conor's a bum and he's a liar. And Conor swears that the paperwork was never sent over. No one ever gave them a legit charity to send the money to. Therefore, he's not sending the money. Which, if that's the case, that is one of the most legit reasons to not give to a charity. You know, I'm not just going to give you $500,000 and put it in your bank account and hope that it goes to your charity. You're out of your mind. So there's a beef back and forth. Conor swears that's what happened. Dustin swears that's not what happened. Who knows? But this might be the fuel to the fire that we need to bring Conor McGregor back to the championship-esque performances that he used to have. So McGregor versus Poirier 3, July 10th. We're going to talk a lot more about that. Full fight breakdown about that. Predictions, of course, comes way later in the months. I'm not going to talk about it too much right now. But I wanted to get that out there because it was officially announced. And it is kind of fight day today because we wanted to talk so much about Jake the douchebag Paul. But there it is. There's the show, guys. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. If there's we're going to do a fan segment question coming up soon as well. April 29th, I can't stress this enough. April 29th, we are going live on YouTube. Justin and Seth will be joining me for the entire first round of the draft. It's going to be a lot of fun. Don't want to miss that. I promise you don't want to miss that. Thanks for listening. If you like us, share us with a friend. Follow us on our social media. I can't stress that enough either. If you follow us on our social media, that's how you get more eyes to the program. Comment. Interact with us on our social media. I'm always there on social media. If you enjoy the show, like I said, share it with a friend. Leave a comment on wherever you're listening. Like, follow, subscribe. Once again, guys, I'm Jacob Courtwright, and this is The Locker Room.